Good morning, everybody. Morning, Dave.
G'day.
Back to Theology Thursday, and this is number 3.
Yeah, we've
This
been looking
is-
at the church.
Yeah, number 3 in our little series on why go to church in the first place. Like, is it still relevant? What's the point? Should we just meet in our little with a few little friends over dinner, or what? Is there a point in coming to the big thing on a Sunday morning? And what is that thing anyway?
We started by defining the church and then looked at the word itself, church, and the underlying reason for the church to meet together. So today I thought, well, the next logical step would be to consider something more about the local gathering that we call church.
Because you started with the sort of universal big thing, like the invisible church versus the visible church and all of that stuff. So yeah, this will be a good one.
Okay, so first let's grab the description of the church again. We've already noted the invisible,
The real
church,
thing.
which is every born again believer.
Yeah, the
on
genuine
earth.
article.
It's universal.
Yeah.
Found
And
in
only
every
God
nation.
knows who they are,
Yep.
really, yes.
And we know that can never come together as a single entity until Christ returns. Until then, it's scattered in time and location.
Yeah.
But it can never gather.
Good point, because the church includes those who have gone before us for the last couple of thousand years and those who will come in the
But
future.
this idea of the church being scattered does not just apply to the universal invisible church. The scattered church should actually be actively present in every community, really,
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
well. It's builders and plumbers and bus drivers and school teachers and caregivers, all of those,
Yep.
full-time mums and a host of other people,
Yep.
all part of the invisible church, but they're serving God in all sorts of ways. They're witnessing, serving, maybe just living as a testimony
Yeah.
to the grace of God.
Yeah, they are the light of the world,
Yeah.
as Jesus called us. You shine in the darkness, you yourself. Yeah, it's good.
So this scattered church is the church in action, both universally and in a local sense. So the scattered church is that word that we used before, the kuriakon, the church or the household of God, doing ministry outside the walls of the building that people sometimes call church.
Yeah.
They're actively engaged in the mission field through their work, families and activities or whatever they might be. Every waking moment, the scattered church is rubbing shoulders with people who don't know Jesus, who may be far from him or maybe just need to be built up in their own faith a bit.
Yeah. Everybody you meet in your day-to-day life, yeah.
And this is what happens when a barista encourages a customer who's having a bad day. A businessman casts some sort of vision that makes the world a better place through Christian values. Or maybe a stay-at-home mum reads Bible stories to the kids.
Yeah.
And day after day, they live the teaching of Jesus. And then after a week of ministry, the scattered church in any given location gathers together.
Right.
So they come together on Sunday and become the gathered church.
Yeah.
And the reason is so they can be taught more of the things of God, more of the things that Jesus taught, because that's the commission, and fellowship with and glean good things from other Christians. And they can be built up by the word, taught and explained to them. They can be equipped then to do the work of ministry before becoming the scattered church again as they return out to their mission field.
It's an opportunity to encourage each other, tell stories, minister to each other, learn, worship together, all of that. It's that when we gather together, right?
So we see that the gathered church's prime job is to build up the people so they can scatter into the mission field.
Right.
So we actually need the gathered church and we need the scattered church. One without the other cannot effectively fulfill the commission that Jesus gave to us.
My mum and dad used to go to a church in Adelaide. It was a Baptist church, and there was a sign, a neon sign. I think it was a light box. It was lit up, and over the door as you leave. So the sign was on the inside of the church, and it said over the door as people are leaving, "You are now entering the mission field." And it was a good reminder that you've gathered. Now it's time to scatter again for a week and be the light of the world, be the salt of the earth, and make a difference, make the world a better place.
So when we scatter, we're fulfilling the ministry, but we need to gather to be built up
Yeah.
and to fellowship, and then we need to scatter for ministry and mission. The two go hand in hand.
They sure do. I remember that great illustration, Dave, where a Christian who doesn't get together with other Christians is kind of like a coal from a fire
Yep.
that is taken out of the fire, and immediately it begins to cool down, so it can't fulfill its purpose of heating the room. But once it goes back in with the other coals, sure enough, it starts to heat up again and starts to fulfill its purpose and starts to get hot again. And it's a bit like that when Christians come together. We get on fire again, and we're reminded of our purpose. We're reminded of our mission.
So that brings us back to the gathered church, the assembly, the ecclesia, which is a word that we've already used, the local church, in other words. Most of the time in the New Testament, teaching about the church is actually specifically about the local church, the gathered or assembled church or congregation, whatever you want to call it. If we go back to before Genesis 1:1, when God created the heavens and the earth, into the vastness of eternity, we find there God. That's why the Bible begins with the phrase, in the beginning God. He was there predating the created universe. We don't know much about God in pre-Genesis terms. However, we know one thing. He was never alone. The Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit,
right.
lived in perfect unity, but not in isolation. God has never been a loner.
No.
He has always lived in community with the
Yes.
Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And they were in that sense, if you like, the gathered Godhead,
Sure.
and without being in any way irreligious. In a sense, when Jesus came, he was the scattered Godhead. If you think about it.
Yeah. But I
He
see where
came
you're
in
going
mission.
with this, Dave, that we're made in God's image. He's community. And so we, the church, are community. And we need to gather. Yeah.
So
Got
when it came to finding a being who could inhabit the earth that he had created,
Yep.
there was a meeting of the Godhead. And God said, let us make man in our image.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Right.
So man was created to be like his creator. Not only a trinity, spirit, soul and body, but one who could not live the life that he was created to live if he remained alone. It's interesting that at every stage of creation in Genesis, God looked at his work and declared that it was good. And when he made man and finished that creation work, if you like, he declared that creation was very good. For now, there was one made in his likeness, in his image, to care for this earth on which he'd been placed.
Yeah.
So when God had just about finished his creative work, he looked at Adam,
Right.
the man. That's what the word Adam means, the man. And for the first time in the creation account in Genesis, God looked at all of the work that he had done, all of the world that he had made, and then he said, it is not good.
No.
Which was quite contrasting to what he'd
Yeah.
said the rest of the time.
Not that it wasn't perfect. It's just something's missing.
Yeah, it had to be perfect, there's no doubt about that, but God knew that if this man was made in the image or the likeness of his creator, he could not be left on
Right.
earth alone. Adam needed to be in community.
In community.
To have someone who was made like him, with whom he could commune, could share his life, live a commonness, which is where we get community from, that he could simply not have with anything else in creation.
So along came Eve.
Yeah. There's a Greek word that's used in the New Testament, and it's generally translated as unity.
Yeah.
And this word is symphonio. We get from this word our English word
Symphony.
Symphony.
Yes. Very good.
Now, I'm sure that everyone watching has seen or heard an orchestra. And if you look at the orchestra, you'll see all of these very different looking and sounding instruments scattered around the stage. And when an orchestra tunes up before the concert, the sound is not very good at all. Each one doing its own thing, tuning in its own way. There's total discord.
I actually wondered, Dave, when you were talking about this earlier, I wondered if that's not intentional. Like, you know, I'm sure that all of those instruments would have a backstage room that they get tuned up in. I like that they do that. You know, they're all tuning up because they point out, like exactly what you're saying, they are actually quite different. They don't, you wouldn't normally think they would go together.
Yeah, you've got these strange screeching noises and banging noises. And, those trumpets and bassoons, they're all wind instruments, but they're all quite unique, quite clearly different.
Right, you got the wind and the strings and the drums and everybody's in there together.
And then the conductor calls the scattered instruments together so that they each continue to make their own unique individual sound, but they begin to intentionally complement each other.
Wow.
And now the sound that is produced is a single but complex sound.
Yeah.
It's still a single sound, but it's very complex knowing what's in it. They begin to work in symphonio as a single symphony orchestra, and they produce an amazing, wonderful sound together.
And you'd never pick that. You know, you'd think, look, they're so different, and they all sound so different that it takes somebody to write the music and a conductor to gather everyone together and say, do what you're created to do, but, you know, let's play together. Let's all symphonize together. And is that a word, symphonize? It is now.
If I may paraphrase the psalmist's well-known words from Psalm 133, behold how good and how pleasant it is when the instruments play together in symphonio.
Yes, when brothers dwell together in unity. Yeah, but it's true when we are in symphonio, when we're...
So the Godhead was in symphonio in eternity. And when God created Eve as a companion for Adam, he made them both so that their differences could be united as one heart, one voice, and in symphonio together, live as God lived, as one. Yeah. The two become one together. Each was unique. Their voices were very different. They made different sounds, but together they were one.
Yes. Like every married couple.
Yeah.
Together. It's just beautiful. It's what could go wrong?
Well, it wasn't far into human history that the fellowship with God was broken because of sin, and disastrous consequences followed. Humanity was separated from God and ultimately even divided from one another. But God initiated a process of restoration designed to bring blessing to all the families of the earth. We read that in Genesis chapter 12. He drew Abram and his descendants into a covenant relationship with himself. And from that context, the people of Israel emerged.
Yeah, fascinating. God's drawing together. So you see it at creation with Adam and Eve and creating this symphony. Then you see it, as you're saying, with Abram and that the covenant with him to come together in symphony in order to bless the world. What came next?
Well, in his dealings with Israel, God prepared the world for that eventual coming of Jesus and the gathering of the ultimate assembly of people from all nations that will occur in the eternity that waits ahead. But God chose Israel to be a special group of people.
So this is like the third tier. You got Adam and Eve, and then you got Abram and his family, and now Israel.
Yep.
And each one, God's trying to create this symphony, this community.
It was a special nation that could come in symphonio and glorify God together and spread God's rule among the nations.
Yeah.
He rescued them from slavery in Egypt and gathered them, called them out as an assembly. So it was an ecclesia, a called out assembly of his people at Mount Sinai, describing them as his treasured possession out of all people.
And as you said, that's like a foretype of what Jesus is going to do with his church. Yeah. So, you know, the culmination of it, you know, but we see this even in the Old Testament, that it's leading to that great gathering of the church. Yeah.
He promised them that if they obeyed his voice and kept his covenant, they would be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. We said in Exodus 19. In their wilderness wanderings and later in the promised land itself, the Israelites assembled on various occasions to meet with God, to express their devotion to him with the sacrificial rites and respond to his word in faith.
Yeah, they had several feasts every year, which God ordained. God said, I want you to come together. Everybody get together. Everyone come to Jerusalem for these particular feasts, and also then locally
So
as
they
well.
were called
Sure.
together to those at the tabernacle, the temple, and later in the synagogue. And that word synagogue comes from a Greek word synagogue, meaning a place of assembly.
Yeah.
It's that same concept.
Where we get the word
meaning-
synergy from.
Yeah. So it's a meeting or assembly, literally a bringing together.
Yeah.
So the root word means to gather, to bring
Right.
together, to assemble. So we're seeing this same concept.
I love that that the word synergy, which it comes from that root word you're mentioning, the bringing together. But not only the bringing, the results of the bringing together are greater than the sum of the parts.
Absolutely.
And that is certainly what Christ is trying to do with his church, that when we come together, we can do more than we could individually, the sum of our parts, that bringing it together. It's a great image and a great calling of what we as the church are meant to be.
And at each gathering, there were divinely appointed priests and prescribed rituals that were an essential aspect, if you like, of their gathering together to God.
So this is still Old Testament.
This is still Old Testament.
I do love, Dave, that it wasn't just to sacrifice a couple of animals and do some liturgical worship, but invariably these feasts, when they were called together, were also to celebrate and party.
Yep.
Like there was a lot of food. Jewish people love a lot of food, and they love to get together and eat and drink, and God said, I want you to do this. Don't just come together just to do the liturgical sort of sacrificial ceremonial sort of stuff. I want you to party as well.
So they were actually taught or shaped by those gatherings. That they were meant to treat one another with mercy and justice and love in every sphere of life.
Sure.
In various ways, the New Testament proclaims the fulfillment of those promises in the person and work of Christ himself. His mission was to gather the lost sheep of Israel, to be their good shepherd, to save them, to lead them, to feed them, protect them as God's flock, and even more than that, in fulfillment of the original promise to Abraham. So his purpose was to draw people from every nation to himself, making disciples of all nations. That's what the commission was for us. And building his assembly, his church, against which even the power of death would not be able to prevail. Quite amazing.
Yes.
So next step, we come straight into the church.
Great, fantastic. So you've done a good job there, Dave, laying out this very clear pattern that God has designed us for, to be together, to gather together, and then scatter us in our mission, but then to keep bringing us together regularly. So look forward to next week, Dave.
Or maybe next week, being Maundy Thursday, we might have an Easter thing and pick the church up again the next week.
Come back to the church after next week. God bless you. Have a great week, and we'll see you on Sunday.
Bless you.